Hello everybody and welcome to another Song of Ice and Fire miniatures game painting session. This time we're going to be working on Pyromancers, and the other thing we're going to be, there's a couple of things we'll cover. Obviously object source lighting is going to be a big thing here. Going to be a big deal because that's a little bit everywhere, even here on the base, but we're also going to do a little bit of freehand, a little sneaky freehand in there. And here is the figure we'll be working on, and I think you can see there's a little extra flaminess down here on the base. I'm going to grab the whole movement tray here. I'm not going to change my focus on this, but I think you can get the sense that, okay, here's the rest of the unit, and you see how we've added some of this flamey stuff here to our movement tray. Let's take you right to the blog post. It shows you a little bit on how that was made. So you see that white stuff right there? That's actually Liquitex Heavy Gloss Gel. So you can see again how everything was put together. See our little flaming skulls, those are from Green Stuff World. And there you go, you can really see that white stuff there. And I've used it for water, I've used it for just about everything. I've even used it for sculpting hair onto large creatures where there's a mold line running through it or whatever. So you can do a lot of stuff. I see a big old batch of it sitting right there next to the flamey skulls. And there's your final result before it gets primed. So what we'll do is get some paint out on the palette. I even have a second one here. Like I said, there's 3 different poses, and we're going to be doing a few tutorials on this. They're also kind of neat because their faces are pretty distinct and they don't have the helmets like we've had on some of the other ones, and obviously a good opportunity for freehand too. We're going to be using our, of course, number 8 round craft brushes, and I love doing this. The one on the right, that is the newer, more pristine one out of the package. This one's a little more worn down. You see we have that filbert effect, but yet we still have the chiseled brush effect. And I still haven't done it, even though I keep saying that I'm going to look up where this comes from. But here you go. Obviously very economical, 12 for $5. You can get them from Hobby Lobby either online or in the stores, but this is something I was thinking about here. See this Treehouse Studios logo right there? I'm going to try and give them an email or something like that. They're from Oklahoma City. We'll use our makeup sponges in the initial stages again. And in terms of paint, well, this is really the big deal right here. Our green fluorescent paint. We'll be using some of our liners as well. I also have red liner in here, so you're going to see that featured pretty prominently. And then we've got our clear paints, like clear green and clear red. And then we've got our clear yellow, that's for highlighting our red, and then maiden flesh, it's for able to make a flesh tone and for some further highlights there. So what we'll do is, in our next step, we're going to do the usual, the initial glazes and shaded base coat. Just get some nice darks on this thing and then see where we're at. So we'll be right back with that in just a second. So we've got some colors out on the palette. And what we're going to do is get the darks in the base, the figure. Yes, this is about object source lighting, but unless we have all the darks here, we're not going to have any light. So we're going to set him aside. We've got our liner paints here, brown liner, sepia liner, red liner, then a couple of our clear paints here. It's red and yellow. This is just water right here. These days I'm trying to keep this where you guys can see it. This way you can tell when it is I'm thinning stuff down. So what we'll do is we'll just drop a little bit of water here. That's in a tougher place for me to reach now, so that's why I'm just using a little bit of a dropper there. Here we'll mix up some of this brown liner. We got the sepia liner over here. And what we'll do is we'll hit the base real quick. Now, because we've got this flame segment right here, it's going to really change this around. That's why I did this particular one here, because I thought, well, it's got multiple light sources on it instead of just one. And I think on some of the dark sword painting tutorials. I've done a few multiple light source type things, but I don't know if I've done any just in this way, just kind of a regular one. So we're also going to do, just going to throw some darker paint here around this line of the base, around the outside edge, just to remind me that, hey, that should be dark. And as always, we're going to take our makeup sponge and we're going to wipe some of this away. I've got my scissors here, and one of the things we can do is, just slice this here. Not only do we have a clean sponge now, but we also have, see how we've got this little chisel edge that can sneak right underneath there and get at some of that. So that's a fun thing. Red liner time. And most of the figure, so we're going to hit it with some of this red liner now. So, and the idea is, here we go. We want to get not just a dark red there. See how it's a little bit on the cooler side as well. It's almost like a purple type red. That means that when we put the lighter reds over the top of it, that are much, not just, what do you say, more saturated and bright that way, but they're also warmer, we'll just get a little more natural contrast that way. And once again, we got our makeup sponge here, and we just start to pull some of that away. And you can see it leaves behind some nifty little shading down there in the crevices. Again, it's a little bit of a darker tone. Now, normally you're working on several of these all at once, so that would have a little chance to dry. So I'll let that sit there for just a bit. I'm going to talk about this. Now, you see this, you say, well, wait a second. Where's all this glow coming from? Well, remember I showed you the movement tray that had all of the action that was going on the movement tray itself as far as flame goes. So that's what this was here. There was actually a little bit of flame right there on the base, so that's what that's reflecting. So that's pretty much what we're going to be doing here with that strategically placed flaming skull. I kept this the same, so we get to see the glowing stuff there. And you can see down in the interior there, a lot of the color, there's not that much change, but we're going to actually be doing a lot of the green here. So each one of these I did intentionally. Some have a little more in terms of flame around it, some have a little less. And that's what makes a unit that has, now there are 3 different poses, as I say all the time. 12 guys, 4 of each pose, but you want to make them a little bit different. That's why we did the, again, this is the texture roller from Green Stuff World. It's that lion theme. Using it now for all of the Lannisters. So we're going to say that's relatively dry. And what we're going to do now, take some of the regular clear red. We'll mix that with the red liner. And now we're going to throw that on here. So it's weird because it actually now looks that much darker. But watch here, and this is almost a little bit of an oil paint kind of thing. So that red liner's mixing in with that. And we're dragging that down. As I say, if you're doing this just a one-off thing, this is where you don't really need water-soluble oils, because if you work like this, you practically have them right here. Now, if this is, you're working on a whole unit, you're going to want the real deal. If you're going to want to do this kind of wet into wet blending right here, because obviously, it's fine like this, where it's just one guy. But if we're going back 1, 2, 3, 12 guys or more, depending, it's going to dry. I mean, you can use the drying retarder and all that other kind of stuff. We used to mess around with those, and I got away from using all the different mediums. It's not like there's anything wrong with them. It's just that I think I do so many figures now. that's not quite so practical anymore. So see how I'm using that reddish glaze, just working with it as opposed to against that. Now I can either say let some of the red dry there a bit, but let's play with this. Now here's that filbert brush mode, as you can see. Let's see what happens when we do this. And you can see we're able to do a wee spot of wet blending here. Now I would say I probably will have to just do this right here and let it set for a couple minutes, which is fine, because what we'll do is we'll just get down to the base real quick here. And we also have some skin color to do. And both of those things, believe it or not, will be facilitated by adding a little bit of maiden flesh to the palette. So let's go here, a little bit of the brown liner. Even let some of the red mix in there, no big deal. And what we'll do is just throw a few lighter colors here. Gotta make sure I get a little more of that sepia liner. And right here, I'm going to stick with warmer colors for this because we've got, it's weird, you think flame, well that should be even warmer. Well, it's that cooler green color. So we're just going to try and warm this up a touch and obviously not get too light because, well, we're not going to show a whole lot of dark if we... All this is highlighted like crazy, so we need this. The highlight for that is going to be the glow from the skull. Speaking of which, we're just going to throw a little bit of not green paint on there. And now we're going to see just how nifty of a skin tone I might have made here. There's a nice dark skin tone right there. It's essentially red, yellow, and white, except obviously our white is an off-white. So we can even add a little more maiden flesh to that, lighten it up. The key is that this is sort of a grayed down flesh tone. Most of the flesh tones, if not all, that come out of paint containers, it says flesh tone, and oh my gosh, they're either super irradiated suntan flesh tone or vampire white flesh tone. They're great other colors. They're just not really good as flesh tones. So that's why I just make up my own and go with that. Might even throw a little touch of yellow in here. And hit this one stone here. Just going to throw some of that on the gauntlets right there. So I think now we can go back into our reds. We've let that dry just a tad bit. We got our brush spread out here. And away we go. You can see how I'm sort of feathering this. Look at that. Just a little bit of a feathered brush stroke right there. So instead of a million layers of progressively lighter red, we're circumventing that a bit by using the clear red, which is not clear but slightly translucent. And it's almost, I've been coining the term dry glaze. Like I said, boy, it's not going to all fit on a t-shirt anymore. It's going to have to be like a bathrobe. All of these different sayings that are emerging here with each new video. So here we go. We're doing that same feathered, scumbling motion. Now, if the paint underneath that had been wet, now you run the risk of sort of tearing away your paint. And that's not something you really want. Not something we really want. You can see some of our initial glaze there is still reasonably wet. Now let's just start to throw a touch of the clear yellow in there. It's not going to lighten it up a ton, but we're doing that same motion here. We're following the sweep of that cloak. Now I can see there's going to be another, we've got essentially minimum of three light sources on this. So it will get a little more complex as we go along, and that's why we're only doing so much with the red here, because we want to establish that glow as soon as possible. Basically, I'm just doing this as I wait for those initial glazes way down in the crevices to dry out enough to where we can just get right in there with our fluorescent green and start to get to the sort of the heart of this whole unit here. I don't know if it's wildfire, balefire, I think is what it's called. I could look at the unit card. I think I actually got that pretty close by. This is a unit that I'm looking forward to trying out, but I think this is another one of those units you have to babysit with some kind of attachment, either a guard captain for random leadership tests. Is it Braun that I think I keep seeing people throwing in with the Pyromancers, because well, it gives them some extra attacks, and it also, even more importantly, it gives them, I think, a leadership type thing. It says for morale test. I don't know if that applies to all panic type things. It would be nice if it did. Of course, you also have High Sparrow, who can give him a little bit of a leadership boost, because leadership is not really these guys' thing. And they're really not a combat unit in their own right either. They augment stuff like, say, Knights of Castlery Rock. Well, it's difficult because they're a much shorter range, so maybe they're the escort for stuff like Halberds to keep stuff off of their flanks. You know, you want to get that dog up there and hitting him in the flank. Well, your dog is gonna have his eyebrows singed off by a bunch of this green fire here. And see that I've been adding progressively a little bit more of the clear yellow, and not only is that it gets lighter, but you can see it's starting to get warmer. You're getting warmer, you're getting warmer. And the warmer we get here, the closer we get to our green glow. It's all about context. It's a chicken and the egg in this case, because they have to have just enough of the red to brought up to a certain stage of lightness to know how far I can go with the green glow. But then it's the other way around. I can only go so far with this before I need that greenish glow to say, okay, we don't want to go too far with our reds and our lights here. Because I know, see, I did a lot of green in this area here. There's going to be all kinds of green in here. I'm not even going to bother painting red on there. We have enough dark red there. So much of that green glow is going to hit it. And what doesn't is going to throw it into shadow. So I'm going to grab my other one real quick and just tell you what the thought process is right there. So give me 1 second here while I grab that. Where are you at? Here you are. So even here, you can see there's a little bit of glow on there. We're going to have that much more in here. So why should I get in there and paint that much more? So we're about as far as I want to get for now with the lighter reds. What we'll do is we'll get some fluorescent green out on the palette. Now we're going to hit that. We're going to wait on the skin tone again till we do this. Because once we see, we have to get a lot of glow on the face there. So we'll be right back with our fluorescent green and establishing the glow. We've got our fluorescent green out on the palette, and we're all set to start establishing that all-important glow. I know I've talked about this, well, basically every time I use the fluorescent paints. I just wanted to show you this. So look at that. That is just a wee bit thick. That's almost like a heavy gloss right there. Now, one of the things too is I don't have my main light on. Aside from the gray bars of death, it also means that this doesn't bark at you quite so much as it does. If I had that regular light on, this thing would just, I have to tone down my brightness. But look how thick that is. Now what happens is people think that that thick paint really covers. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the palette bigger here, big as I can. Good, that's about in the center, and look at that. Now, yes, I'm painting on a palette, but see how that just doesn't cover it all? People they think, well, yeah, it's got this big old thick blob, it's going to cover it great. Yeah, not so much. Look at that. Barely covered that at all. This is why you have things like either the clear yellow or even a little bit of the maiden flesh here. Here, let's mix up a batch. And what happens now is, see, that covers a little bit better. So you basically have to mix in a little bit of a lighter opaque in order to get that coverage. But initially here, remember that I was talking about the dry glaze sort of thing? That is the tactic that really works well with this stuff. So we are gonna start out here and we're gonna throw some of this into our flames and our glow. Doesn't have to be precise in any way, shape, or form. Not looking for precision here. We're just looking for, this is essentially the shaded base coat of object source lighting. Now, we used to, back in the day, we painted either all or most of the figure and then put the glow on afterwards. It made perfect sense, and there's nothing wrong with that approach. It's just not the easiest approach in the world. Let's put it that way. You're going to end up doing a lot of extra work in the form of, wait a minute, I painted all of that stuff and now I've just covered it up with this glow. If it's a one-off figure, well, how much time did you really lose? Not that big a deal. When you do that on an entire unit, plus their movement tray, now that's a no bueno kind of thing. You don't want to be spending that much extra time essentially repainting something you've already painted. And see how even here a second layer already starts to make that just that much brighter. So here, let's go with our brightness a touch more so you can see that. Now it's tricky. You can go, we can violate that less is more principle faster with object source lighting than just about anything else. I think the only thing that rivals it is maybe chipping. And we love chipping. We love object source lighting. So well, let's do more of it because that's better. Because that's what keeps running through my mind is, oh, wouldn't it be cool, this, that, and the other? And then all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe I should have backed away from that a bit. Now this looks light, and believe me, it's not. Now here, look at what I'm doing right there. This is 100% paint. There is no water. There's nothing that's thinning that. That's just me using my homemade filbert here and actually getting in. See, look at this. I can really be nice and gentle with that and give it a feathered look. We can do more. We can add more to this. No problem. See, look at this. Here's a second layer. It already starts to look brighter. I can always tone that down. I also don't want to get too involved in a final glow right there, because remember, we got freehand that has to go there. So this is, I think I started doing it with the dark sword stuff, as I try to do tutorials that combine multiple techniques together. because you do something like, okay, here's object source lighting, or here's non-metallic metal, which is fantastic until now you got to do all of those together, and it can be a little different thing trying to combine those and manage them than it is to just do one. So see, we've got this pretty well now established here. We even got the face there. Now I might throw out a little touch more of this out here and lighten it up in some places. Yeah, we don't want to go too crazy with it. I'm even going to take just a touch of yellow in there, because adding the red, it can gray it down. You can add white in there too, I suppose, but it automatically seems to just start getting chalky. So, and keep in mind too, now we've got fire here, like actual, well, sort of fire, and now I've got to remember, almost forgot, with the fire stuff, you want the base of it, the source of it, to be the lightest part. I remember when I first started painting the fire stuff, of course, what did I do? I painted the ends of the flame the lightest color, and the outer parts, the inner parts were darkest. And that's kind of the reverse of fire. That's sort of inverted fire, and we don't want inverted fire. Once again, see how much paint is on that brush. So it's not a dry brush. Can't emphasize that enough. Now here, on the other one, there was some glow there. But we have to make a bit of a logistical decision here. And we have to say, you know what, if we want this glow coming up this way, we can't have glow coming from absolutely everywhere at once. So sometimes you have to manage your effect. See how we had that green down? I don't know if you can really see it. It's pretty subtle, but we're going to add a little more of our greenish glow down in here. And it's not meant to really be seen that intensely. Now, it's just the lights can't get down in there because it's in shadow, unfortunately. But trust me, it's there. I'm even going to ever so slightly. See, look how much paint is on that brush that I have to get rid of. That's just how much is on there. So this is really fun. People always say, just anytime I can, I try to do the object source lighting thing. It's fun. Sets a bit of a theme for the miniature. The other thing too, and it's hard to phrase it in the right way. It's not so much that it makes the figure more realistic, but it does something. Your eye sees that and goes, yeah, okay. Freehand does that too. There's things where your eye just says, okay, I know what scale that is in reality, so therefore I think this is a little bit more like reality because it has this little extra touch to it. I mean, there's nothing realistic at all about green fire, but it lends a sense of scale to these little tiny guys that could really use a hand with that sense of scale. So we're just dropping now some additional lights here and there. Now where is our... Here we go. And you can see we can still get lighter here. We're still sort of in a mid-tone light. We're not doing anything that's extreme yet. I'm just throwing a little more of the maiden flesh. It lightens it up. It makes it more opaque. Because in the next little segment here, what we'll do is we'll work on the face, some of the other mid-tones here on the reds, because, well, we've got the glow established. I believe the last thing we'll do, the last step will be the freehand design along the bottom edge there, and that pattern now is, if it seems like I'm just blasting through it, well, what's that saying? Familiarity breeds contempt, and, well, I'm pretty darn familiar with that now. I've painted it dozens of times. Knights of Castlery Rock. Oh, on some of my other Lannister characters, I've painted on a bunch of bases. So yeah, I'm pretty familiar with that pattern. Okay, so that pretty much, for now. Here, what I actually, you know what, I will take a bit of my clear green here, and we're actually going to darken this down just a touch, just so you can see what that's like. But I'm making sure to add a little bit of my fluorescent green. The clears and the fluorescents were just, they go together so well. They were just kind of made for each other. So here we go. See, we're darkening it down, but we're not losing the intensity. We'll do the same thing here. Going to do the same thing on the edges. See how that starts to make the edges of the flame a little bit darker now. And we'll zoom in on this closer later. Like I said, this is essentially shaded base coat for object source lighting. And that's all we're trying to do is get in enough of this greenish glow here. Utilizing that clear green is really, it's nice because it's an intense color all by itself, and by mixing just a little bit of the fluorescent in there, it gives it that extra little jolt that you need. Alright, so let's call this stage basically ready to go here. Now we're going to move on to stuff like the face. Get a little more lights in here, because now we've got the glow established, and then we'll double back to the glow itself and get some of the brightest things down. So we'll be right back with that in just a second. So we're going to put a face on this guy right here. We don't have any really new colors out in the palette. We're just going to work with what's already out there. We're going to grab some of that sepia liner too. It's really not going to be all that different from the initial color that we put here. So we're getting a little bit of yellow into that. Here, let's get just a touch more. Get a little bit more of our sepia in there. We want to keep it grayed down. So let's see what we have. We should have a decent little dark skin tone there. See, look at that. That's the skin tone test. And that matches pretty darn close, but yet look at how it's relatively dark on the palette. So let's get him a little bit of the skin on his hands here. That's why we did the glow first, because it's a little bit easier to paint this over the top of it. I am even going to take some of that and throw some of that down here on the base to lighten up a few areas. Not too many, just a little bit, a little subtle lighting there. And it's always a little bit tricky here because you want to underlight the face here, and he's small. I mean, this is obviously not some gigantic either 75mm figure like the wizard was, where we could do some snazzy things with the skin colors there. Speaking of that, I'm going to grab just a touch of this yellow, mix it in there, and I just want to establish these couple of lines here. It's this gold trim that they've got, and before I keep forgetting about it, I'm just going to throw some of that in there. That's all it is. This is a little note to remind myself, hey, there's supposed to be that stuff there, so think about it. Good enough. There's a little bit of gold on the end of these gauntlet/bracers there. Now we'll go back into skin tones, and now I can just take the maiden flesh and I can start to throw this in with the rest of this skin tone here. Now if you're not comfortable working with these big old craft brushes and stuff like this, nobody's forcing you to. I'm certainly not. It's what I'm used to / comfortable with. And eventually I will be using a smaller brush. It's just for this stage where we're just blocking some things in. It makes sense. At least to me it does. Because if you remember, we're only, we're maybe a half hour into this, 35 minutes if you count where we talked about paints and such. So obviously there's a long ways to go. But the whole point is to just get some things established as quickly as possible, and then you build from there. It's easier to do that. Not let's say you just paint nothing but the face and nothing else. And that's where you can end up with that skin tone that's too light or too dark because you had nothing next to it to compare it to. Absolutely nothing. Which is why we're going to take some of our red liner and some of the sepia liner. Now we're going to throw a bit of hair up in here. Got the crazy sort of monk hairdo there. We're actually going to throw a little bit of water in here. And we'll do a bit of a little touch of a glaze there. It's not a ton of water so that it's running all over the place. It's just enough water to make things flow a little bit better. And now we've got a skin tone over here. Got a little bit of my clear green. So I got a little bit of a grayish, shadowy skin tone there. And the idea is I don't want that to be just this sharp line like he's wearing a frisbee on his head or something. And while that would be humorous, that's probably not ideal or what the point is. So now we're taking a little more of that green, a little more of the maiden flesh. And I'm trying to use just a minimal amount of colors. And see, what that does is it takes that a little way. It's a little less flesh tone color and a little bit more grayish. It's sort of like a de facto 5 o'clock shadow, I guess you could call it. I'll just throw a little bit of that here, and I'm going to see if there's not some places here along the... Oh, actually there's another chunk of fire right there that I didn't see before. It's been long enough. It hasn't been that long, but it's been apparently long enough for me to not be quite as familiar with everything that I did on these guys. I'm obviously working on a whole bunch of things all at the same time. That's sort of the nature of the beast. So that's pretty well established. I'm also gonna take a little bit of this and make somewhat of a darker glaze on the gauntlets there. And speaking of the smaller brush, now I can just find you got your small little Series 7 type thing going on. Let's a little bit of maiden flesh back out here once again. Now there will be some parts of this where it's not going to be quite on camera just because I need to be able to see it. So at this point I'm trying to now indicate where the actual whites of the eyes are. And it's okay if you need to essentially go back and forth a little bit. You throw some lights on there and then oops, now we're going to go back the other way and put some darks in here. That's okay. Sometimes you just say, well, yeah, okay, I thought that was going to work, and nope, that's not quite working the way I want. And then you make a little bit of a change. What's interesting is that this process, in some ways, is actually a little bit easier with oils, because the oil paint actually acts like a conditioner for the brush, and I actually have this nasty little, quite literally one-haired brush that I can use with my oil paints. So here's the other eye. Just dropping that in there. A little bit of a light on that chin. Let's get some light here on the knuckles of this hand. But all the while, try and remember, yeah, we got this green glow we need to think about here. We always have, fortunately, we have some of our skin tone mix left. We'll get ourselves back into some mid-tones here. Mid-tones that in some ways almost look like shadows. Now, we're also gonna get a little bit of our glow color back out here. We'll mix it with some of that maiden flesh. And this is where people can sometimes have a rough time with it, because you can see how thick that is. And you also remember that from that beginning stage how, well, even when it's thick, it doesn't really cover so well. And that's when now when you're thinning it down, it's going to cover that much less. I guess you have to be willing to sort of practice, and you have to be patient with yourself. I say it all the time. While I got this, I'm also going to add some of this brighter green into here. Sometimes you have the color there, might as well just use it while you got it. And just to remind myself, I'm going to throw that over there. So there's really, sorry, there's not a ton of the bright green glow on the face, actually. There's just a hint of it. It's all I'm trying to do is get a little hint of that there. Even a little bit on his hair. Sometimes we do fudge things a little bit off of reality. Sometimes it's just necessary. Yeah, let's run a little more of the darker green in there. The other thing I guess you can do is with this you can add a little bit of the gloss, some kind of gloss medium over the top of that. Just some water effects to give it the shininess. Just trying to get the upper lid there. Now, this is one of those things where you just may not be able to see what I'm doing. I'm trying to get the upper cheekbone on that side. I guess you can. Just kind of assumed that you couldn't. And we'll lighten this up just a touch. Like I said, these are the little adjustments you got to make as you move along. Let's throw on just this touch of white here. We'll also be needing that for our green glow. What's that phrase? We haven't, until about 40 minutes in, there was no white on the palette. And now we got our eyes a little lighter. Just watering that down a little bit there. Okay. And I'm actually just gonna, I've got the red liner out here, so I'm gonna use that for some of the darks here. And that's basically making the upper part of the eye here. So you got your eyebrow, eyelid, and then a little bit of a pupil right there. Now again, some of this is just, it's in shadow, so it's tough for you to see. And so I still got good some of my fluorescent green here, and the idea is I try and get a little bit of separation here under, right under here. So what this does is it sort of makes the eyebrow separate now from the eye itself. It was just one big mass of dark, and the idea over there was just to get a little separation in that. So we're doing the same thing over there. Just painting in the eyebrows can add a lot of expression to a face. And I'm going to see if I can't get the camera zoomed in a little bit more for you so that you can see that. There, so we got that. And the idea, once again, is just to give him a little more expression. Just mix in a few other little skin colors right here. Something that's got a little more red in it. The back of the hand here, because there are some blood vessels there. Some parts of the face need to get warmed up a touch. Don't want it to be too cool and too gray. Once again, I'm going to see if I can't do a little touch more right there. Let's see if I can't zoom him, zoom him in a bit. And we'll do that. So I think now, here we'll even try, let's see if we can't get adventurous here and really do this eyebrow here. There, that's a little bit stronger even. A little bit stronger. And now that little bit of a light color in between to get some separation. Also adding a bit to the cheek here. So these are the type of things that, let's say you just want to get the eyes on there, and that's no big. You're not going to deal with eyebrows or anything like that. And that's fine too. It's just something that I'm used to doing with my eyes anyway, so why not add it where I can? So let's start to think about some midtones in other places too, like the reds. Sorry. Something in my throat, not sure what that is. It's just, it keeps being cold here. The heater has been going off. because it's in the 40s and of course raining, so who knows. So here's, now we're going to get this a little bit lighter. Trying to follow some of the folds here. And by using the yellow to lighten things up, it doesn't get chalky. And the clear yellow also doesn't make it too orange. And sort of the final piece to that would be to mix a little bit of the maiden flesh in there. See, we've got it here. So it makes it lighter, but now it's just, instead of getting to be orange, it's a light red, but without, once again, without being too chalky. But we don't necessarily want a lot of light red. The lighter that red is, the less the lighting effect is going to show up on it. And we got a couple of folds here. I don't necessarily want to also highlight every single fold. Sometimes you accept, take some that you're going to accentuate, and there's others they're there because you got shadows there already. You don't that's by adding all that shadow, you in some ways have to add less highlight. So you can highlight by increasing shadows. There's another nice little saying. Also, don't want to get too involved with shading across this area because, well, remember we've got our freehand that's going to go across there. And we keep going this way. Here, let's get our lighter red up here on the edge of the collar. Get that away from the skin color. I can add a little more yellow here to lighten this up. Like that. So what the next stage will be is obviously we're going to focus back in again on our glow. We're going to try we're going to try and finalize that a little bit more. We'll add some of those brightest lights, and maybe we'll add a little more of the clear green also to darken it in some places. And when it's that balance of where it's a little lighter in some areas, a little darker in others, that's what's going to make it look like a glow as opposed to just a bunch of green paint slapped in areas. So we'll get our green back out on the palette, and we'll do that in just a second. Now let's try to finish off our glow here. And we've got the three things: our white, we've got our fluorescent green, and this is where it really starts to, we find a few places we can really make this thing get really popped. We're gonna do some light here. Gotta get that light coat down into the eye socket there. So we're adding that light at the base of the flame, like we talked about in the probably that third segment there where we're first working on our glow. We first started to mess with it. Now again, if you go too light in these areas, it's really easy to make it more subdued because you take that fluorescent green, and remember, it makes that really nice dry glaze. So we get some on the underside of the chin there, a little touch on the nose. Get some, gonna get a little bit of the glow in here too. Here I'm gonna get some more of that fluorescent green. And let's just work some of that right into here. A little bit under that gauntlet there, bracer, whatever we want to call it. We'll keep going with our light. Over here, over here. Let's get ourselves a few lighter green touches like here and here. A few on the boots. And as like we say, less is certainly more. Just don't want to go too nuts with that. And we'll get some just enough here. But we also want to be thinking about going in the opposite direction here, so we're going to take some of the clear green. This is to knock some of it down a bit. Okay, right here. Because we want the greenish, we want the greenish tone to be there, but not necessarily all of that super bright green. But sometimes then it's necessary to get back into some of our lighter green here too. It's gonna be sort of a judgment call for you, what's gonna work one way or the other. Right now we darken down more of the top parts of the flames, and now we're going to take some of the fluorescent green again, and so we'll go over some of the lighter areas that we just put in. It's that back and forth process with the flames. Sometimes it just happens real easy, and then there's other times, boy, it just doesn't. Could depend on the shape of the miniature too. Maybe it's just some of the shapes are a little weird, and that just makes it harder kind of by default. And sometimes the effect almost just paints itself. I think the Sorcerer was one where it was super easy. There were so many folds that was just basically it's a whole series of folds everywhere. So that it just made it real easy, even though there were multiple light sources on that. I've had other things that were painting the object source lighting on there was just about as painful as you could possibly imagine. Now I don't know if I don't have any sepia liner left, so I'm going to throw a little bit more out here. And this is I'm going to try and get some more natural color on the skull here too. Don't want it to be all just green. So here, oddly enough, that will actually help to accentuate some of the effect. Now remember the flaming skulls, and I think I'll try and link. Oh, no, actually, well, there's a previous episode. What am I talking about? You've already seen the basing episode on this. Well, maybe you haven't. You haven't gotten that far into the video series, but there is actually a video in the basing side of things that shows how that was actually painted, which is why this is being added to the basing pledge here for folks that are on that one, because they got to see how the base was made. But painting the base is just every bit as much part of constructing the base in the first place. I still got some of my original red liner left. That's from the very beginning. I'm just gonna throw a few darks on our bracer right here. Just to get a few darks in there. We're also going to do a few darks in our red. So what we will do, once this, so you have this glow reasonably finalized, we'll get into that freehand stuff, and hopefully it just makes it a little less scary, because I know people really do, for whatever reason, the freehand stuff, well, and object source lighting too. People just tend to get really freaked out by that. Now, hopefully, this notion of, well, establishing this stuff earlier rather than later makes it a little less scary for you, because now that phrase that I hear all the time is, well, I didn't want to ruin it by adding that. Well, that's kind of a non-starter, because, well, you don't have much painted. There's not much to ruin. Now, some people might look at that in a few different ways, like, well, okay, you're saying I don't have much to screw up. What do you got to lose? Here, I'm going to add some of the darker green once again on the outer peripheries of the flame, and I could have done even more larger flames when I was originally working on this. And I just, no, this is plenty. Got plenty of that going right here. And I'm also going to try and manage some of this glow right here. See, I'm going to go back over the top of that. Don't be afraid to go, like I said, go back and forth with this. If you think, you know, there's a little too much there, maybe let's draw this back a touch. Maybe it doesn't need to be quite so intense. That's what we're doing here. It's real subtle. There's a little bit of the original stone / tile color back in there. And maybe that's all it takes. And we're just going to grab my other one here. I just want to see, did I do... Nope, so I did not paint. I was looking to see if I had painted the bottle with a little bit of the gloss medium there. And it was pretty apparent that I hadn't, so I won't do it on this one either. Alright. It's going to get a little light there. Again, sorry if some of these things wander off screen. They're just times where I need to be able to get my hand in the right spot. And that's just how that is. So with a little touch of that red liner, I just need to get a little more shape on these hands. And so I'm just going to do that. Wipe some of the excess away. And just a few of these little lines here is enough to sort of restore some shape back to the hands. A little bit of dark on the gauntlet there. So we're going to say that's pretty well set on the flame parts here. And the next thing we'll tackle is this right here. And you can see we've got this set up pretty well. And this is similar enough to the other one where you see it sort of cuts through the glow also. So we're going to manage that aspect as well. So we'll be right back with that in just a second. It's time to add in that freehand pattern. And when you're going to do any kind of freehand pattern, what's the most important thing? You have to break it down into its simplest shapes. Just like we broke down the entire miniature into simple bits and pieces and chunks. And it's pretty simple. So you've got a line here, long solid lines. Then you've got a diamond shape with these basically parentheses around it, then a straight line, and they're connected this way. So this, what you're doing is you're repeating this one part here. This, and this, and this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 elements inside this. And the idea is you just position these and repeat them around, right around the end of the cloth there. So let's do a little bit of mixing together of a few things. I'm also going to get, let's get some orange out here so that it doesn't get too, yeah, just a little bit of, just some of this clear orange. Any orange would do, pretty much. There we go. Just gets that off of the, it's looking a little too just dirty yellow right there. You'll notice that's pretty dark. Nowhere near as light as what the final is going to be, and that's intentional. Here, we'll just, now it's not super watery either. It's enough to flow. And we're just going to start with our lines here. So we're going to do the bottom line for it's just easier. See, in this way, I can just wipe it away. And what you can see too, this is why I say don't really be so terrified, because you can barely see this line, and you saw right away I put the paint down. I said, I do not like that, and I just wiped it away. So we're doing a couple of things here. See, we're just gonna throw in our design there. Now we're gonna get back into here and do the second part of that line, the second line, not the second part of it. Where there's folds, sometimes you have to cut your shape too, depending on the fold where that's at. I think it's, yeah, it's real subtle. You can barely see that that's there. What we're going to do is I'm going to find a spot here, and we are going to throw in one of our little diamond shapes with a parentheses on this side, another one on this side, the straight line, and the straight line. You can see it's barely there. There's a couple reasons for this. First of all, we're going to build on that. Now here we go. We're going to parentheses here, parentheses here. We got a diamond shape in here, another parentheses there, a line there. Got parentheses there, and now I've done this enough times on these cloaks to learn kind of where to stop it so that you get a more complete pattern. Repeat patterns can be tough. There's just kind of no way around it. There's another reason why we're using this real subtle version of this, because now where the glow is, see, we're not overpowering our glow, because the freehand shouldn't really necessarily be lighter than the glow. And oh, look at this. We got a parentheses, we got ourselves a diamond, and a parentheses, and boom, we got it to all fit. Now, there was some fudging along the way. You probably couldn't really even see it. But that's the magicians that we are. Now, it gets interesting. And look at the difference between these two. So see, that's just a little bit of an indication right there. Now we're going to start to, we've built our framework, now we can add to it. And look at how much lighter that is. So we're going to start to add to that a little bit here. Certainly here, but then see how we let that fade, and then we say, oh look, it's the light, the red is lighter here, so we're going to lighten that up there. Then you say, wait a minute, that's in shadow. Why am I going to add light colors to a shadow area? And now I'll just do the rest of this, and you'll be able to see how much already your freehand pattern, look at the difference there. Nice little bit of a difference. And here, let's get some of this away. There is enough water in here to make sure that that flows, but not so much that it just runs all over the place. And all I can really tell you is that's a touch thing. That just happens with practice. And if you look at some of the freehand videos, I know that the original painting pyramid one is already on the Patreon page. Check that one out. And you'll see that I took my patterns and I drew them on a piece of, I think it was a mat board or something like that. So let's say you haven't done this before, ever. Take a piece of paper and just draw out the design. Doesn't matter what scale it is. The bigger probably is the better, just to start with, just to get that pattern into your head. Just get that muscle memory going. Start with that. And then, let's say it's on a banner or whatever, and we started doing this. You take your banner and then you cut it to size, and now you scale it down. And a couple of things are going to happen. First of all, you'll figure out, all right, yeah, this is going to work. I can get this into my head now. And also you're going to find out it's too big, or there's too much stuff for too small of a space. And that's where you sort of correct your design and you make some changes. This originally had more stuff going on, but when I realized how many times I was going to have to do it, potentially 50 or 60 more times, I said, well, we're going to simplify this a touch. And now we're adding another layer of somewhat lighter color over the top of that, but we're only doing certain portions of it, not equally everywhere. Because the freehand, I remember I did one thing and I did all this really nifty freehand. It was fantastic. And you looked at it and you said, holy smokes, that's all you see is the freehand. So then I had to tone it down. It's easier for me to do something like that now. It would just be basically a glaze, a darker glaze over in the recesses. At the time, I was okay. That was much more of a big deal in that era, 10 years ago plus, something like that. Yeah, I had all kinds of nifty freehand, but it was too intense, just showed up too much. And that can happen. So here, this is where I'm probably going to go back over with my green glow, make some adjustments there. Because we have sort of a confluence of light right there. So let's do a few final lighter things. Let's get some yellow, some of that white. We're going to thin it down a touch, just a little bit. And now we're going to find just a few places to really hit with a bit of an accent. Also don't want to forget my little connective lines here. And if you're wondering where I saw this pattern, let me see if I can find one of the cards for you. Well, I had one out. Ah, here it is. Oh, and look, it happens to be the Pyromancers. And that was this pattern right here. And I basically simplified it to be something that was easier to produce over and over again. You see there's not a straight line there, that's sort of multiple semi-parentheses. I just simplified it into a diamond shape. Here, let's get that. Now you can see it. Now I could go even more complex. I could make this a double line here on the top and the bottom. Plenty of things that I could do to make it more complicated, but do I need to do that on something where there's 12 of these guys sitting in a tray? In effect, the only freehand you're going to see is on the guys in the back row. You're certainly not going to see it on the front row guys, because they're blocked by two other rows of guys. That also has to go into your calculus there. Is how much are people really going to be able to actually see what I'm doing here? See how we highlight parts of that, not the entire thing? Just bits and pieces of it, not in the folds there, but on the parts out here. And get rid of some of that extra. See, just a touch there. Now this is where it gets interesting. We have to say, all right, is that green glow, does that need to be a little lighter? Oh look, I still have some of my fluorescent green sitting here. So let's go like so over the top. This is why when we were first doing our glow a while back, we didn't go all out in this area because we knew that this was coming. See how we're starting to almost integrate that into our freehand just a bit. And I'm even going to take the liberty of extending that glow a little more up this way. And what we'll do is, this is broken down into an awful lot of segments for not a super long video. But I just thought it's all about that breaking things down into manageable chunks. Now see here, this is another area where I look at this and I say, you know what? Maybe there should be something going on here. So it's what I'm doing right here. Yes, I know this is about freehand, but when I see things like this that probably need to be adjusted a bit, I should do it right away while I'm thinking about it. There, I got some more of my green up here. That way we can tone that down a touch. So that's, yeah, that was important. I kind of forgot. See, it's, again, you have to have the context of the whole. You need to be thinking about the whole thing at once. And if that's too bright when we get into our final detail phase, well, guess what? We can also knock that down a little bit. Here, guess what? We need some of that there too. Not a bunch, just a little bit. And there I get a little bit on the edge of the cloak here. And that works its way up to where the freehand is, but not over the top of it. There, that's nice. And hope that was on screen for you. So what we'll do is now we'll do some of these, like I said, some of the final details. We'll maybe try and find some extra darks in some places, a few other highlights, and see things. And what are we going to do with stuff like this, where we maybe find a few extra lights there. So we'll be right back with those final thoughts. We're going to look over this thing and we're going to see areas where we can maybe darken some stuff down, maybe get a little more definition in others. I just threw some gray liner out on the palette. That's what I'm going to be using for the base there. But the other thing I like to do with it, and this is a good spot right here, so we're just going to paint some of these little cracks onto the stones like that. Here, let's get one here. It's a little extra touch like that. That's fun. It breaks up the shape just a little bit. We get some darks in some places where we just think we need them. Because if that's darker, then our light's going to show up. I mean, the whole thing of you must have dark to show light, which is why I'm going to go back and grab one of my other brushes here. And while I'm thinking about it, let's just tackle this edge here. And I had been using black for the longest time, but on these movement trays here, for a couple of different reasons, starting to use the gray liner. It's a little less stark than the black. It's obviously dark enough, does the job. It's not quite as intense as the black, and it makes a little more sense when you see the movement tray on the table as well. So these, like I said, these are the things that you, maybe as you get more into the game system or as you start to do more and more units, you start to change. I know I'm basing the Lannisters far different than the original basing scheme. I didn't have the texture rollers at the time, and I didn't really know quite as much about what their design elements looked like, just as far as the actual Lannisters. And the more I've learned about that since, I've made some adjustments. So now that we've got that, I'm going to throw in a little more of the fluorescent green here into this area. Now, we're just doing one here. So if this was the entire unit, this was a typical army painting video, well, I wouldn't be hanging out in this one area this long, just doing this much with it. Now here, we're sort of doing the figures more one at a time. This is the third out of 12 figures. I'm mostly doing this because I thought this way I could do some more, I could get a few more tutorials out of it instead of just approaching the whole unit. I thought, well, this way I can emphasize more, okay, object source lighting on one, and the freehand stuff, and breaking it out, just the how to paint the bases with a little more time spent on them than you could possibly do maybe an army painting thing. Now, once again, we're looking for that gray liner to get into some darker shapes here. The gauntlet just a little bit too light in some areas. Or the bracer, whichever one it is. That was reasonably watery, so, and we're going to throw some more of that in here. I'm even going to work on there's a seam line there that I'm just going to bring back a touch. And maybe we'll even bring out some of the clear red. Is this on the palette? And we'll throw it back up there where you can see it. Some of the clear yellow, and we'll get the maiden flesh out there too. And now we're gonna, those highlights that I talked about, that I said we're gonna stay away from the super bright highlights on this stuff. Well, now we're pretty well into this. And we can say, yeah, let's get a few brighter highlights in some places. Same mix as before, only now. Gonna find a spot here, and we'll do a highlight there. Let's even get a little more of the touch more of the yellow in there. And then I can just emphasize that one seam a little bit more. Same on here. Just in this right here at this edge. And then in this area, I might just go the opposite way. I'm going to take some of that gray liner, some of the red, and enhance a few shadows. Always have to think about both ways, not just adding more, perpetually adding more highlights. So I made myself sort of a purple-red type color there. Yeah, none of it is earth-shattering. It's just try and keep things simple. I'm going to use some of that same right here. I'm going to just glaze over the top of this. See how I darken that down? I'm going to do the same thing over here. Same thing in here. I'm going to take some of the straight up gray liner. Let's see if we can get some more darks back into the hair. Like so, because there was plenty of light there. We got to go back in with some darks here. But it's broken. It's not a, remember we're trying to avoid the head frisbee thing, so Yeah, head frisbee's not so good. And I'm going to take some of this sepia line and mix it with the gray. We're going to tone down this belt in some areas. Maybe here even get a little bit more definition. And at this point now, it's, and I say this every time, it's, you could spend hours more on this thing and refine and refine and refine. And it's all, it's whatever you need it to be at that point. If it is it's a commission thing or whatever, and it's got to be really, really snazzy, well, then you're going to be spending extra time in that refinement stage. If you need it for a game later that night, you may be spending a whole lot less time in the refinement stage. So here I realized there was nothing but primer down there, and now that situation is rectified. Now up here on the upper part of the chest, I want to manage this a little bit here. So we're going to do some of that, get some of our lighter color back in here. Yeah, a bit like that. Let's even go maybe a little touch lighter here. And what I'll do is I'll break out the original figure here. We'll look at it real quick. And there's obviously going to be big differences because of where this light source is placed. That's just, here we go. There he is. So you can see the impact that had, having that skull sitting right there. Now here, I see on the gauntlets I had some more lights there. And I'm just going to see if I can do this with just what I got, instead of having to put some new stuff out there. So let's get a light on the edge of this like we did on our other one, like so. And we need to do a similar thing here. So this is why sometimes you just have to go back in and say, okay, yeah, did I miss something? So clearly that was an area where I had missed something. Let's see what we got here on the hands. Also, I'm going to want maybe a little more definition. Because I see that on the other one. So I'm kind of darkening it down to lighten it back up again. I know that seems weird, but that's part of that back and forth. That's more like it, yeah. And then even here, gonna add some more light. So it's probably even an imperceptible change. One of the things I was noticing, it looked like he had 3 fingers instead of 4 in that part of his hand, which is really, I mean, he could be missing fingers or a finger, but I didn't really want that, so just went in there and changed that. I also have to think on the face, is there anywhere where I maybe need some additional darks, or maybe I put some green glow where there shouldn't be green glow. I'm just toning down that area there. So what I'll do is I'm just going to say we've got that pretty well completed. Now maybe Here, let's throw out a little bit of our white again for some of our bale fire. See if we can't find a few spots that are just really, really, really intense. Maybe in there. And here. Yeah, it just needed a little extra push in a few spots. And maybe one or two there. Yeah, that's what it needed. It needed just one little extra push there. But as always, you can, in a heartbeat, go too far with something like that. So we'll kind of stop there. Except for I want to put a little more of a light there. Another one there. I need something on these knuckles once more. There. So what we'll do is we'll do some more of these. Maybe do them a couple at a time. Maybe even do one in oils just to show you how that works. I just want to say thanks again for everybody that supports me on the Patreon page. I appreciate that a lot. You see that blog address that's scrolling along the bottom right there? That's where you can find all the finished pictures of stuff. And like I showed you earlier, it's where you can see some of the supplemental things like this. So some pictures of what they looked like primed, what some of the materials were. I try to have these all kind of work together in conjunction. So be sure to check out the blog for things. Sometimes that also talks about stuff that's coming up in the future. But what we'll do is we'll do some more of these and certainly way more Song of Ice and Fire miniature tutorials in the future. So thanks again, and we'll catch you on the next one.